Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a massive update for the professional reproductive community, the official 2026 ESHRE guidelines on good practice in the IVF laboratory. Our main focus? We're answering one crucial question. Based on the absolute best available evidence and the latest expertise of the ESHRE working group, what exactly is current good practice in the modern IVF lab? Let's get right into it.
To ground us, we're looking directly at the official publication from the journal Human Reproduction. Now, these guidelines are dense, packed with complex, systemic, and clinical updates. But don't worry, we're going to distill all that heavy material into actionable, everyday practices that you can literally take back to your clinic today to boost safety, efficiency, and patient outcomes.
Here is our roadmap for the explainer. We'll be covering 5 main pillars of excellence. We'll start with lab management and quality control, then move to sample traceability and safety. After that, we'll hit gamete handling and fertilization, embryo culture and biopsy, and finally wrap up with cryopreservation and emergency protocols.
Let's kick things off with Pillar 1, Lab Management and Quality Control.
Okay, so what's really interesting right out of the gate is how the new EU SOHO, or Substances of Human Origin regulations, are treating the quality management system. A QMS is no longer just a nice-to-have idea. It is a strictly mandatory, fully documented system. It bakes in rigorous risk management, flawless traceability, and regular audits, both internal and external. Basically, it's the absolute bedrock of continuous improvement and risk mitigation in your lab. But for a QMS to actually work, you've got to divide responsibilities clearly. At the systemic level, the lab director handles updating standard operating procedures, managing risk policies, and keeping an eye on key performance indicators. Then, on the practical side, your clinical embryologists are the first line of defense. They're the ones strictly following those SOPs, documenting clinical data, and doing the daily validations. Oh, and here is a massive safety takeaway. You must always have a minimum of 2 qualified clinical embryologists on site. It doesn't matter how small your clinic is or how light the workload is that day, you absolutely need that backup. Now, even with the best staff, the physical space itself is absolutely critical. Optimal lab design mandates strictly controlled environments. We're talking medical-grade HEPA filters, strict volatile organic compound or VOC controls, and positive air pressure to constantly push contaminants out of the room. And if you're building or renovating, you have to build an adequate time for construction materials to off-gas. Reducing human error and embryo toxicity literally starts with the very air you breathe and the ergonomics of your workstation.
Moving right along to Pillar 2, sample traceability and safety.
Under those new EU SOHO regulations we just mentioned, there's a huge push for the Single European Code, or SEC. This is a standardized, machine-readable tool that assigns a unique identifier to every single donation across the EU. Why is this such a big deal? Well, it makes long-term biovigilance so much easier and significantly lowers the risks when exchanging materials across borders. You can track tissues from donor to recipient perfectly without ever exposing sensitive personal identity. So, how do we verify these samples internally? You essentially have a strict choice between manual or electronic systems. For manual witnessing, the guidelines are very clear. You need a true double eyewitness approach. That means 2 qualified staff members independently verifying. They explicitly advise against passive confirmation, like someone just reading a name out loud and the other nodding, because that introduces major confirmation bias. On the flip side, electronic witnessing systems, or EWS, automate this whole tracking process. But listen, technology doesn't replace human vigilance. EWS brings its own unique risks, like alarm fatigue or the normalization of deviance, when staff just blindly click past routine warnings. Because of that, EWS requires scheduled audits and a rock-solid manual backup protocol for when the tech inevitably fails. This traceability also applies to anything touching the gametes, specifically your lab consumables. Every single item needs to meet stringent CE or medical device regulation standards. If you're ever forced to use non-CE materials, they must be tested with a mouse embryo assay or a human sperm survival assay before you even think about clinical use. Also, smart inventory management is vital here. Run a first expiry, first out stock system so you never use compromised media, always verify the pH of new media batches, and definitely use appropriately sized containers to limit air exposure and temperature swings.
All right, on to Pillar 3, gamete handling and fertilization.
There is a really notable shift here regarding abstinence recommendations for sperm collection. The latest evidence firmly supports a much shorter abstinence period, specifically 2 days or less.
This shorter window has been proven to significantly lower oxidative stress and boost overall sperm quality. And once you have the gametes, the physical handling environment is just as crucial. You've got to minimize any time those cells spend outside of rigidly controlled temperature and pH conditions to avoid shocking them.
We've also got a major update from the Istanbul Consensus regarding atypically fertilized zygotes. In the past, anything outside of a standard 2PN was heavily scrutinized or just immediately discarded. But the evidence has shifted. We now know that 1PN and 2.1PN zygotes can actually be cautiously cultured to the blastocyst stage and used clinically. But, and this is a big caveat, you must use pre-implantation genetic testing for aneuploidy or PGTA to confirm biparental diploidy, and you have to operate under an approved internal policy. As for 3PN, that is still absolutely not recommended for routine practice.
Next up is Pillar 4, embryo culture and biopsy.
To keep embryos perfectly stable and optimize homeostasis during culture, your physical parameters have to be dialed in perfectly. The guidelines are specific. Utilize low oxygen concentrations, we're talking 5% or less, to cut down on oxidative stress. You also need appropriate oil overlays on your dishes to stop evaporation and prevent drastic shifts in osmolarity. Plus, to minimize mechanical and environmental disturbances, utilizing time-lapse incubators is highly recommended.
When it's time for the actual blastocyst biopsy for genetic testing, precision and contamination control are everything. It's a strict step-by-step process. Step 1. Thoroughly remove cumulus cells and rigorously rinse the oocytes before ICSI to prevent any maternal DNA contamination. Step 2. Use a guided non-contact laser beam to make a super precise opening in the zona pellucida. Step 3. Carefully remove exactly 5 to 10 trophectoderm cells. You're trying to perfectly balance getting enough DNA against not damaging the embryo's viability. And finally, Step 4. Do the tubing in a totally separate, dedicated area while wearing strict protective clothing. You do not want to lose the sample or cross-contaminate DNA at this stage.
Finally, Pillar 5, cryopreservation and emergency protocols.
Let's first clear up exactly when to use which freezing method. Vitrification is the highly effective, modern gold standard. It is the absolute recommended choice for preserving oocytes, pronuclear or cleavage stage embryos, and blastocysts. But slow freezing hasn't disappeared entirely. It actually remains the recommended method for ejaculated sperm and prepubertal testicular tissue that isn't expected to contain mature sperm yet. It's all about applying the right technique to the right biological material.
But what happens when things go totally wrong? Your contingency and emergency plan is your lab's absolute lifeline. Let's rapid fire through the essentials you need to safeguard your reproductive materials and your staff. First, an uninterrupted power supply and backup generators dedicated to all critical equipment. Second, manual backup filling strategies and reserve tanks sitting ready just in case your liquid nitrogen supply fails. Third, emergency vitrification protocols so you can instantly move embryos out of culture during a sudden crisis, like a fire or flood. Fourth, written service level agreements with neighboring backup clinics for off-site patient treatments. And the most important piece? You have to run simulation-based emergency drills with your staff. An emergency plan is completely useless if it's just sitting in a binder.
And that brings us to a final, pretty provocative question for you to take away from this explainer. If a power outage, a gas leak, or a natural disaster hit your clinic tonight, are your laboratory and emergency protocols truly ready to be executed flawlessly? I highly encourage you to internally audit your clinic's emergency setup right now, using these 2026 ESHRE guidelines as your benchmark. Thank you so much for joining me to explore this vital source material. Keep learning, keep optimizing, and we'll see you next time.